Understanding the plot to kill Jesus Christ. Let's turn to Matthew chapter 26, verses 3, 4, and 5. Then the chief priests and the elders of the people were gathered together in the court of the high priest named Caiaphas, and they plotted together to seize Jesus by stealth and kill him. But they were saying, not during the festival, otherwise a riot might occur among the people. Now they wanted Jesus Christ dead, but they feared the people. So they tried to take him by stealth, in secrecy, and kill him. Now that explains why they came for Jesus Christ in the middle of the night, like a thief. It explains what Jesus Christ said in Matthew chapter 26, verses 55. At that time, Jesus said to the crowd, "Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as you would against a robber? Every day I used to sit in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me." Now the chief priest and the high priest manipulated and pressured Pontinus Pilate, the Roman governor, into sentencing Jesus Christ to death. They did this because the chief priest and the high priest were afraid of the people and thought they would riot against them. Now Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, knew that the priest had brought Jesus Christ before him because of envy, and the Bible says so. It says so in Matthew chapter 27, verses 17 and 18, and in Mark chapter 15, verses 9, 10, and 11. So when the people gathered together, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew that because of envy, they had handed him over. Mark chapter 15, verses 9, 10, and 11. Pilate answered them, saying, "Do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews?" For he was aware that the chief priests had handed him over because of envy. But the chief priests stirred up the people to ask him to release Barabbas for them instead. Now the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they explain what happened to Jesus Christ when he was handed over to Pontius Pilate. However, the Gospel of Luke tells us that Pilate sent Jesus Christ to Herod to be judged. Now the other Gospels, they don't mention Herod judging Jesus Christ. The Gospel of John gives us additional information that's not included in the other Gospels. But the four Gospels make it clear that Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, did not want to sentence Jesus Christ to death. In fact, he wanted to release him. But the chief priest and the high priest manipulated and pressured Pontius Pilate into delivering Jesus Christ into their hands to be crucified. Now let's go to the four Gospels and verify what I just told you. Let's turn to Matthew chapter 27, verses 20 through 26. But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to put Jesus to death. But the governor said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?" They all said, "Crucify him." And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they kept shouting all the more, saying, "Crucify him." When Pilate saw that he was accomplishing nothing, but rather that a riot was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowds, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to that yourselves." And all the people said, "His blood shall be on us and on our children." Then he released Barabbas for them, but after having Jesus scourged, he handed him over. Mark chapter 15, verses 9 through 15. Pilate answered them, saying, "Do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews?" For he was aware that the chief priests had handed him over because of envy. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to ask him to release Barabbas for them instead. Answering again, Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with him whom you call the King of the Jews?"
They shouted back, "Crucify him." But Pilate said to them, "Why, what evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him." Wishing to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas for them, and after having Jesus scourged, he handed him over to be crucified. Luke chapter 23, verses 6 to 25. When Pilate heard it, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who himself also was in Jerusalem at that time. Now Herod was very glad when he saw Jesus, for he had wanted to see him for a long time, because he had been hearing about him, and was hoping to see some signs performed by him. And he questioned him at some length, but he answered him nothing. And the chief priests and the scribes were standing there, accusing him vehemently. And Herod, with his soldiers, after treating him with contempt and mocking him, dressed him in a gorgeous robe and sent him back to Pilate. Now Herod and Pilate became friends with one another that very day, for before they had been enemies with each other. Pilate summoned the chief priests and the rulers and the people, and said to them, "You brought this man to me as one who incites the people to rebellion. And behold, having examined him before you, I have found no guilt in this man regarding the charges which you make against him. No, nor has Herod, for he sent him back to us. And behold, nothing deserving death has been done by this man. Therefore I will punish him and release him." Now he was obliged to release to them at the feast one prisoner. But they cried out all together, saying, "Away with this man, and release for us Barabbas." He was one who had been thrown into prison for insurrection made in the city and murder. Pilate, wanting to release Jesus, addressed them again. But they kept on calling out, saying, "Crucify, crucify him." And he said to them the third time, "Why, what evil has this man done? I have found in him no guilt demanding death. Therefore I will punish him and release him." But they were insistent with loud voices, asking that he be crucified, and their voices began to prevail. And Pilate pronounced sentence that their demand be granted. And he released the man they were asking for, who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, where he delivered Jesus to their will. John chapter 19, verses 6 through 15. So when the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, "Crucify, crucify." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and by that law he ought to die, because he made himself out to be the Son of God." Therefore when Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. And he entered into the praetorium again, and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave no answer. So Pilate said to him, "Do you not speak to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you, and have authority to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no authority over me unless it had been given to you from above. For this reason, he who delivered me to you has the greater sin." As a result of this, Pilate made efforts to release him. But the Jews cried out, saying, "If you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar." Therefore when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of preparation for the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. And he said to the Jews, "Behold your king." So they cried out, "Away with him, away with him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar."
Now in verse 15, the chief priest confesses his loyalty, not to the one true God in heaven, but to Julius Caesar Tiberius, the emperor of Rome at that time. Now we understand who wanted Jesus Christ dead and why. We also understand why the chief priests, the high priests, the scribes, and the Pharisees did not take Jesus Christ and have him killed, because they were afraid that the people
would riot against them.
Now I encourage you to read the Bible from beginning to end and try to get a better understanding of God's Word, the truth. The truth will not bind you. The truth will set you free. This is Bible Studies. The truth is about to be told. Till next time.